as we start every day since Simchas Torah war has started, with 2 chapters of Tehillim and Tzedakah for our brothers and sisters in Israel. I'll say the chapters of Tehillim, and if you have a pushka, we have one here. Well, in a moment we'll give Tzedakah, or everyone can give now. Lam not say, David, excellent. Yan Chad Nevi'im Sarai Sagef Hashem Elahei Yaakov Yishlach Ezer Chom Yikodesh U'Tzion Yisadaka Yizkar Kol Mechasecha Vaylas Vayadash Nesela Yiten Lecha Chilvavecha V'Chalatzasecha Yimalei Neranana B'Shuasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgal Yimalei Adinoi Kol Mishalei Secha Ata Yadati Yeshi Adonai Mashiach Yehaneyu Mishmei Kadshay B'Gvuros Yesha Yeminoi Elev Arechev Elev Asusu Anachnu B'Shem Adinoi Eloheinu Nasker Hema Karu V'Nafalo V'Anachnu Kamnu V'Nisoidad Adonai Hashia Melech Yaneinu V'Yam Kareinu Hallelujah, Hallelujah B'Kadshay, Hallelujah B'Kia Uzay, Hallelujah B'Gvurai Sab, Hallelujah Karev B'Zay, Hallelujah B'Seika Shofar, Hallelujah B'Nevel V'Chinar, Hallelujah B'Seifel Machal, Hallelujah B'Minim B'Ugav, Hallelujah B'Tziltzalei Shama, Hallelujah B'Tziltzalei Serua, Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah, Hallelujah. And go back to the regular. If you have a pushka, please give some tzedakah together as well. Tzedakah. Hatzil and Lavis. Tzion b'mishpat tipadev shaveh b'tzedakah. The captives, it says in Yeshaya, will be redeemed with tzedakah. So now's the time to add lots and lots of tzedakah. Hashem should redeem every single Jewish captive from every single situation, wherever they are in the world. Okay, back to the Gemara. Today we'll actually brought in some props to help make the Gemara a little bit more clear. We have Reb Chelbai in the name of Reb Chama Bar Goria, the original Bar Goria, in the name of Rav.
Would that be with synthetic conference?
Who?
Goria?
Gor means a young lion,
Oh,
like the Maral of Prague, came from David HaMelech. His name Gur Aryeh, because Yehuda is called Gur Aryeh Yehuda. The name Gorari, you've ever heard of the last name Gorari,
Yes,
comes
sir.
from the name Gur Aryeh. They're descendants of the Maral.
Oh.
So Goria means a lion.
In my family tree, the Morales Prague was a cousin and also an uncle.
Very right. I wouldn't have thought any different. So Reb Chelbai says in the name of Rav Goria, in the name of Rav, Megillah nikras sefer v'nikras igeres. We have 2 interesting titles, descriptions that the Megillah itself calls a Megillah. On the one hand, Megillah is called a sefer, v'nichtav b'sefer, the last word of chapter 9, as on the screen. Esther's order confirmed the matters of Purim and was inscribed in a sefer, in a book, sort of like a sefer Torah. On the other hand, in 2 places, the Megillah is called Igeres HaPurim, the letter of Purim. So in some aspects, a Megillah is like a letter. In some aspects, it's like a Sefer Torah. So which aspects is it like what? Some of them the Gemara described already. Some of them we'll describe now. If a Megillah does not have Atzei Chaim, it does not have handles like a Sefer Torah has. Because a Megillah is called an Igeres, a letter. And as a matter of fact, I brought my handy Megillah here, my Megillah case. It says, my Megillah, when it was written, I think it was about 12, 13 years ago, I think it was $1,400. Now it's probably a lot more. But the Megillah itself, the way it's written, Megillah is folded up like a letter as you read it. It's like a letter. It's not rolled up, it's not wrapped, it's folded exactly like a letter like this. As well, a Megillah does not have to be exact. If some letters are puzzle, some letters are invalid, some words are missing, it's fine, it's kosher. If you read the Megillah, a few words without looking inside by heart, it's kosher. it does not have those laws of a Sefer Torah. On the other hand, it must be written on parchment, which is amazing. Parchment is so hardy. So we have silk parchments from thousands of years ago. And it has to be with lines, like we said over here.
Animal parchment, right?
Right, it has to be from animal skin, from kosher animals, preferably from animal which is shechted. And it has to have what's called tfira, sewing. So we'll have that in a few minutes, a little bit more about, just to be clarified with sewing.
As far as actually what you saw with animal veins.
Animal veins, yes. Okay, we'll do first, here's just a show exactly what it looks like. You can see on the screen, maybe make it a little larger. Here is the threads that are used to sew a Sefer Torah or a Megillah. Everything in the Megillah has to be, or the Sefer Torah has to be made from the hide of an animal. So halacha we got from Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. It's a law which we have in a tradition. The gidin, the sinews of the animal, usually from the hindquarters, from the non-kosher part of the animal, where it have thicker veins. So there they make the sinews, the gidim, out of it, and they're compacted, they're pressed, they're dried, and they're very strong, they're very sturdy and hardy. Tefillin are closed as well with gidin, with the veins of the animals. That's what's used to sew shut tefillin. One bowl of gidin should be enough for an entire Sefer Torah. It's very difficult to make, and there's only very few places that actually make their own gidin, their own thread sinews for a Sefer Torah. You need a very specific type of needle to use, a gold plated needle, which is very sharp, very exact. And Seifrim usually buy it with a hechsher. And the way it's actually sewn, you have to sew it l'shem kedusha Sefer Torah, having in mind for the holiness of a Sefer Torah. And if you see, here's a Sefer Torah, I'll make it large. See, here's the Sefer Torah where they, instead of fixing it, we're going to have this in the Gemara over here. It's an old Sefer Torah from about 250 years ago. So in the shul in Czechoslovakia, where it was, not necessarily did they have a sofer who knew halacha, or maybe they just didn't have the materials on hand, and he sewed it closed. There was he had to make a repair in the Sefer Torah to sew two parchment together, and he used a silk thread to sew it. So the halacha is that if the majority is kosher gidin, then it's kosher. Let's continue. What happened? Here was regular glue that's holding in place. Silk could be used in emergencies, but has to be repaired. And since it was part of a Torah, it has to be put into shemus, into Geniza. Now the Torah is separate over here. Here's our kosher gidin. And this is how they repair the Sefer Torah. We hold two sections together with a clip. Here are the loops. It's a different method of sewing the Sefer Torah than we have today. Okay, now let's do the
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
sure.
We're not allowed to eat from the hind part of the cow or whatever. Why is that part allowed to be used for the Torah?
Excellent question. Because I think there's a difference when it comes to eating and comes to using it. You're allowed to wear a leather jacket even if it's made from, let's say, pigskin from a not kosher animal. You could play with a basketball or a football that's made out of pigskin, The only prohibition the Torah gave was to eat it. Other things you're not allowed to benefit from, like meat and milk together, you can't benefit from. So let's say the best type of ink would be made out of a mixture of meat and milk, then you wouldn't be able to use that ink.
That's a special prohibition.
That's Isser Hana, Isser of a prohibition also of any benefit from it.
That's because the Torah specifically goes after meat and milk.
Correct. Right, but Nevela, things which are not kosher, you're allowed to have benefit from. You're just not allowed to eat it, and also if you shouldn't make it your main business. You know, for example, selling, owning, swine farms or things like that should not be your main business. But if you own it, you're allowed to sell it and you're allowed to make a profit off, as long as you don't eat it. And here is a colleague of mine. He lives in Muncie. He's showing how to fix a Sefer Torah. He has a Sofer Center, and he's a real estate agent. If any of you ever in Muncie,
From the SoferCenter.com.
let's see. It's not going.
I'm going to be changing at the same time. Okay, so we have recently got a
Why is it? I want it to be going from the. Not sure. I can't hear it from here. I thought.
at the Sefer Torah with our fingers. But one
Okay, so here he's basically fixing a Sefer Torah. We'll make it go a little faster. Okay, a little faster. Right. So he's going through a Sefer Torah until he gets to the end. And you see he's holding Gidon, he's holding the sinews, and now he's starting to sew it. Now it comes to the very end. You see there's a bunch of holes in the Eitz Chaim, and that's how he sews it in. And just to keep that in mind, because it's to talk about in Gemara, how distant the holes have to be.
So if you buff up, because if you make an entire Sefer Torah, it should be buffed up. Then it's just the status of a holy book you can read, but it's not a real Torah then, right?
Okay, you see, what was that? He was just basically sewing it together. Okay. Here's the end of the Torah. Here's the Eitz Chaim. Basically, he shows how to sew it to the Eitz Chaim.
If you have a non-kosher Torah, it doesn't have the status of a Torah, right?
Correct.
So that's just the status of a good.
Anyways, fine. You're all done. Yeah, that's that idea. So let's read the Gemara inside. The Megillah is called in Sefer. It needs to be sewn with the Gidin, the sinews, and it's called Anigeris. Says Reb Chama bar Gurya in the name of Rav. Nikra Sefer. Megillah is called the Sefer, a book in Tafra bechute pishtan psula. If one sewed a Sefer Torah with threads of flax, regular threads, it's puzzle, it's invalid. And if you saw over there, there was a mixture of silk threads together with animal threads with Gidin, and it's puzzle, it's invalid. Megillah is called a letter. That if you had only 3 stitches, stitching it together, as Rashi explained, Rashi understands, Shlosha Chutin is, let's say you have a Megillah like this, and only had 1 stitch on top, 1 in the middle, and 1 on bottom, it is kosher. Like a letter doesn't have to be perfect. A letter could be, people, if we had a long letter, or just 1, 2, 3. Amar of Nachman says, Uvad sheyiyu mishulashim. If you have an Art Scroll Gemara, you are on near 3 lines from the bottom of the page of 19b. You'll be on 19b 3. No, 19a 3. 19a 3, yes. Near the bottom of the second column. As long as they are evenly spaced, 1/3 apart from each other. Interestingly, there's two opinions what the Gemara means over here. There's Rashi and other Rishonim like the Ritva. One opinion says what it means is that you have to have 3 different stitches at any place. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or evenly spaced. Rashi says they have to be evenly spaced. The third opinion says that they have to be 3 together. So preferably if you have 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3 on the bottom, 1, 2, 3 in the middle, 1, 2, 3 on top, it is kosher, even if it's not sewed all the way. Our Megillas and our Sefer Torahs are sewed all the way from top to bottom. But if they're not, if the Megillah is not sewed entirely from top to bottom, only one here, one there, one there. It's like imagine stapling 1 staple here, 1 staple there, 1 staple on the bottom. For a Megillah, it's kosher, not for a Sefer Torah, because a Megillah is called an Igeres, a letter, and a letter doesn't have to have all the stringencies and all the exact details that are needed in a Sefer Torah. And as long as it has the 3 gidin, 3 strands of 3 sinews. If by a Sefer Torah, is it sufficient? That is a point of discussion. If for a Sefer Torah, Megillah has to be written not in 3 separate parchments. See, most Megillas, at least our Megillas, the Megillah Sadur is a little bit different. It's usually, I think, 10 columns, and it's made up of 3 pieces of parchment: 1, 2, and 3. But you can't have 3 separate parchments. You need to have them all connected together as one, because it's called igeres, a letter, not igros, letters. So therefore, it has to be all connected as one. It's called a sefer. It has to be connected, not with glue, not with tape, and not with regular thread, but rather with gidin, with sinews of animals. You don't have to, in the Sefer Torah, there's much more, it's a science exactly how it's done. You don't have to be so exact in the Megillah. Sure. This Megillah, is done in the modern version, the modern way of things, where from the front of the Megillah, you can't see any threads, any sinews, and also Sefer Torah, everything's done in the back. There's like a pinch together, and you sew it in the back, and you can't see anything from the front. The older types had a loop type. We saw one on a video, and in the loop type, you were able to see through the front as well, sort of like on a button or something like that. Sure.
It doesn't make sense. You can
Then they glue it, then something to glue place it over.
Yeah.
Just place it over to keep them.
So this particular one is not pasted over. Nowadays, you see what I mean? This is the back side of the Megillah,
Okay, I see.
and all the threads are here. From the other side, all you see is a fold,
Yeah.
like this.
I'm trying to see the
Back
side
side.
of the thread. I see the.
Yeah. It feels and looks like a regular thread. It's just much more stiff.
Mm.
You see, it's much stronger. Ask your wife. I know she does a lot of knitting. She might know about this. And you must have at least 3 stitches on top and bottom. Nowadays, many seifrim, they add on glue as well. Not regular Elmer's glue and not the Gorilla glue, but it's glue made out of parchment. They take all the scraps of parchment, they put a little water, put it on a low flame, and after about an hour or 2, it becomes glue. And they use that glue to actually glue everything together. And then they sew it. Sewing is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu from our Sinai, we have a tradition how we must sew it together with gidin, with sinews. However, the gluing is an addition, and that it's only sort of as an extra support. We're going to have very soon in the Gemara. Now, if you see over here, there's a little gap on top, there's a little gap on bottom. It doesn't go all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom for a very good reason. Because look at this little play Torah over here. See what happens? If you pull too much on it, it could rip. And you don't want it to rip. you don't want it to rip on the parchment. If it rips anywhere, it should rip between two parchments. If anywhere is ripping, it should rip between two papers. Two papers should separate. Like for example, over here, if God forbid it tears because someone's pulling it, you got two guys getting an aliyah, and one pulls this way, one pulls that way, or the guy's doing hadba and he's separating it, something's happening. If it tears, it usually tears in the place of the least resistance, right? First. So since it has a small, it's not close to the top, here's where it's going to separate first. And then, if God forbid a tear happens, very uncommon, very rare, but it should happen along the teper, along where it's sewed, and not in the middle of the parchment, God forbid, over here. Because then you have real issues with the Sefer Torah. So we leave an empty space from top and bottom. And this Gemara itself, there's two explanations. When he says Mishulashim, he said you should do the Megillah at even intervals every third. Does that mean you have 4 empty areas? So you have one on top, one on bottom, and one in middle. So you have 2 empty areas. Or do you do it at intervals? A third of the way in, half the way in, another third of the way in, and then on bottom. So you have a big empty space on bottom, a big empty space on top, and you have 4 sections. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a discussion among the Rishonim what the meaning of our Gemara is. The difference between Rashi and the Ritva and the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is the most strict and says for Megillah, minimum needed is step 3 on top, 3 in the middle, 3 stitches on top, 3 in the middle, 3 on bottom, plus leaving at least an empty area between the top and bottom. How much empty space do you need to leave between the top and the bottom? And that's also differences in halacha, but the general rule of thumb is it depends on the size of the Sefer Torah or the Megillah. A shorter one needs a space of only an etzba, of a finger, that without anything being sewed, and a larger one needs more space, like 2 etzbais. This one is about, I would say, 2 etzbais, 2 fingers. The sewing starts from the top of the page. Let's continue. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Says Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. So we had it just now 2 teachings from Rav. Now we're going to have a teaching from Shmuel. HaKarnes HaMegillah, the Megillah Ksuva Ben Aksuvim. So if you have an art scroll, you just turn the page to 9a-4. In the days of the Gemara, days of the Amoraim in the Talmud, the Torah was not printed in beautiful Sfarim like you have now. It was not printed, it was not written on papyrus paper during the times of the Goyim, which would be about the, what's it called, the Bronze Ages? About the 600s, 700s, 800s.
Oh.
What's those ages called?
Oh.
Before the Middle Ages.
The Iron Age, the Bronze Age,
So during that age, Byzantine era, I'm not sure, but the time of the Goyim, which were the generation after, several hundred years after the conclusion of the writing of the Talmud, then they introduced this new Chinese invention called Chinese paper. Eventually, it was called papyrus because it was called paper because it was made most commonly from the papyrus plant, which grew very plentiful in Europe at that time.
Oh, wait, papyrus came originally from Egypt, the Egyptians.
Egyptians used papyrus also, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny, they didn't use Egyptian papyrus in the Goyim. They used more Chinese papyrus. Until today, it's very hardy. Those are more made out of like shmatas, like clothes and cotton and leftover rags. But once they started using paper, then they started writing down anything not from a Sefer Torah on paper as well. But in the times of the Tanaim, even though there was Egyptian papyrus around, they didn't use it really, perhaps because it was very flimsy. Instead, they used to write everything on parchment. Parchment's very expensive. Today, it's difficult to come by. You can imagine what it was like back then, much harder to come by. And so they had a nach. they have in one of the, I'm sure they're in Kodesh, but they have like a sefer of Nach. Nevi'im and Ksuvim all written down on parchment. So you have the Torah written, we all have a Torah. I think in the Taimani and Yemenite communities, even till today, they read the Haftarah from a parchment, not from a actual Torah, maybe some Yemenite communities.
Well, the Yemenite are interesting because actually, they were semi-isolated, so certain things that they
Right.
do have been
As a Jewish tradition.
from way
Correct.
way back that nobody does anymore.
So you can have the entire Nach, Nevi'im and Ksuvim prophets and the writings, the later parts of Torah, all written together in a scroll. And let's say I have a Ksuvim, I have all the writings in one scroll. So I have the 5 Megillahs together, one large Megillah. So let's say this Megillah had all the Megillahs together, and Megillahs Shirim, Keheles, Ruth, Eicha, and Esther, all written in one long Megillah. So I say, great, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, I'm going to read from my Megillah Eicha from here. When it comes to Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, I'm going to read from the Megillah. It comes to Purim, I'll read from the Megillah Esther, or the whole Nach. And this is a book that we use in school to learn. I teach children with this book, and I'll use it to learn from my Megillah as well. So there's a halacha, and go will ask you a riddle, and you only answer it after we learn this Gemara. Let me give you a scenario. If you have Yamin Shul, and Megillah was read, and everybody was in Shul, and then, so after we finished reading the Megillah, we noticed there was one more person in the Shul. We didn't notice him before. And this person, because he was there, he invalidated everybody's hearing of the Megillah, and everybody has to hear the Megillah again, all because of this one person. That's a riddle. Let's see if you can figure it out after this Gemara. So we're in a show. We heard the entire Megillah. We bang Haman. Now we're ready to bang this guy in the head. What in the world are you doing in shul? Because this one individual was here, we all have to hear the Megillah again. None of us were Yotze, were fulfilled our obligation on Megillah because he was in the room. Shmendrik. Let's see. Let's read this next Megillah, this next piece of Gemara, and we'll figure it out. Amar. If you heard Amar Shmuel says, if you heard the name of Shmuel, if a Megillah must be written specifically for a Megillah, for the sake of a Megillah. If I have an entire Nevi'im or Ksuvim and Nach written on parchment, I cannot read the Megillah from there. Lo Yatzeh, have not fulfilled your obligation, because Megillah is called an Igeres, a letter. When I write you a letter, I don't write you 20 letters and expect you to deliver it to everyone. I write a letter to you. So since a Megillah is an Igeres, it's a letter, it must be written independently just for a Megillah. And as well, if I'm reading it in shul, and I'm reading it from I have a whole Nach, and I'm reading the Megillah from there, people don't realize that I'm reading the Megillah for the sake of Purim. Could be it's just I'm reading Nach. Not necessarily, it could be someone who doesn't understand the Megillah, but he knows that the person is now reading from the same book that he reads every Haftarah from. Not necessarily will he realize that he's reading Megillah Esther. He's not reading the Megillah. So therefore, he has to read the Megillah again, because there's no Pirsumi Nisa, there's no spreading, publicizing of the miracle. Now, how Pirsumi Nisa, we learned before Daf Yud, is we read the Megillah in shul because there's a minyan with 10 people. There's another opinion which says that even if you're hearing the Megillah not with a minyan, you should still go to shul because you're reading it in a public place. That itself is also part of Pirsumi Nisa. So if there's a minyan that heard the Megillah from Megillah written, written between all the other books of the Torah, of the Nach, Lo Yatsi, have not fulfilled your obligation because there's no Pirsumi Nisa, no publicizing of the miracle of Purim, because it seems like he's reading a regular book of Nach. Amar Rava says, this is only in the case where everything is even where it's all the same size. However, I don't have an exact example, but maybe because this Torah was a little bit ripped over here, if you could see it. Maybe it's an example. It's a written Torah. It's a paper Torah, so not to worry about it if it's ripped. Or even this one over here, right? This might be a better example. If it's taller or shorter, so let's say the entire Nach is this size, and the Megillah is written on a different size parchment. So it's written on different parchments of a different size. It's a little bit shorter or a little bit taller. So it sticks out like a sore thumb. The Maxidom Yatra Porta. If it's a little bit taller, or Yossi, Shalom Aleichem, welcome for joining. Thank you for joining. If the Torah is if the Megillah is a little taller or shorter than the other, thank you. Than the other books of Nach that it's connected to, then it's kosher, because now it's recognizable that it's unique for a Megillah, and you could even read it with a minion. If the Megillah is not shorter, not taller, it's the same size, then you had not fulfilled the obligation of Megillah. But if it is the same size, you've not fulfilled your obligation of Megillah. If it's a little taller, shorter, and it's recognizable, you're reading from Megillah, then there's Besumi Nisa, there's publicizing of the miracle, then you're Yotze, then you have fulfilled your obligation. So Dovi, now could you answer this riddle based on the Gemara we just learned? We're in Shul, I repeat it, we're in Shul, and we all heard the Megillah, all of us here, and then we looked around, and then there's one person we didn't notice, and because of that one person, none of us were Yotze, fulfilled our obligation of the Megillah. We all have to hear it again.
It's what the Presuming Nisa for everybody.
Why not?
Because
How not?
they didn't notice him.
Right. What makes it Presuming Nisa? If you have
10.
Right. So if you had 9 people in Shul, and we read, and the Megillah was read from a Sefer Nach, a book of Nach, which the Megillah was the same size as everything else. So then you're allowed to read from there, because since you don't have a minion, is not presuming Nisa, is not publicizing the miracle, and therefore you fulfill your obligation. However, when the 10th person comes in, now you have a minion, now you have presuming Nisa, now you have a publicizing the miracle, and because he's there, we can't use such a Megillah. It's invalid, and therefore, because of him, none of us fulfilled our obligation of the Megillah. We all have to hear it again.
But you said it was valid, reading from a Sefer.
Yeah, it's valid if there's no minion, right? Because then it's not doing it in public. If it's in public, then you're not publicizing the miracle of Purim. Mikra Megillah, great question. We had this on Dalet Hatzvi-Bais in a Tosfos. Do you make a bracha on Megillah without a minion? So there's actually different. I mean, there's different opinions in Rishonim. What most of the world does is that they make the bracha before and after. Chabad, we pass on according to other opinions in halacha that we only say the bracha before, but not the bracha after. The bracha after the Megillah, we only say with a minion. The bracha after the Megillah, we only say if there's a minion. Haravas Rivenu. But if you're hearing the Megillah at home, we don't make that bracha after the Megillah.
By the way, actually, when I was looking actually at the article, actually tonight I was seeing actually the Gid Hadasha, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now actually I see exactly what a Gid is, so it has to be similar veins. Are there? Is that what we're referring to as far as actually what we're using for the term as a Gid Hadasha, or is it from different parts?
It could be they use Gid Hanasha. Gid Hanasha is more of a nerve, I think, as opposed to a vein.
I see.
I'm not sure exactly what the Gidin are made out of. Gid means more a vein. Gid means a vein, and I'm sorry, not a vein. It means a nerve. And could be like a thread-like substance inside of the nerve. I'm not sure exactly how it works.
Excuse me, the idea of presuming Nusa is 10. So you could read it at home with 10 and make a bracha, right?
Yes, definitely. And I think the bracha afterwards as well, right? And if I'm reading in the hospital or If I'm reading in a assisted facility and there's 10 people, I could also make a bracha, right? But if you reading in shul and you don't have 10, you don't make the Harabas Rabbeinu afterwards.
So you're saying that if you're not in a minyan and you read that the Megillah from an ordinary sefer,
Yes, if you're reading it by yourself from a ordinary sefer, yeah.
now are you allowed to do that lechatchila or only the B'diavad?
Dovi, you come from big Rabbanim, you're asking deep questions. Yeah, you're asking very big, good questions. It's a big discussion in Rishonim. Tosfos, Rabbeinu Hananel, all on this page, and they all discuss your exact question. Are you allowed to do this in the Chatchila? Should you do this in the shul? The Torah Evan, the Torah, he writes something interesting, that even in the shul, even if you have a minyan, but if you didn't open up the Megillah, right? And you're talking about a Megillah written with a nach, but instead you had it rolled up like this, and you're reading it column by, I don't know if you can see on the screen. I'm reading column by column, going along like this. So instead of holding the Megillah in a regular way, I'm reading it sort of like a Sefer Torah. That it's all rolled up, except for the part that I'm actually reading from currently. Like if you're reading it like this, trying to see if they can see me on the screen. So he says, then you could be yotzei l'chatchila in a shul, even with a big crowd, even with a minyan, because the whole suspicion is people will think, oh, you're taking out a regular sefer of nach or ksuvim, and you're not really taking out a Megillah, and you're not publicizing the miracle of Purim. But here, since no one can see what it is, because it's not spread out, since it's like only like this, and only the one reading can actually see what it is, so then you're right. He says, and you can even read from Middle Chatchila. It's according to the Torah Evan. I don't think the halacha is really the Shulchan Aruch does not pass like that. He brings from the Bala Iftar, one of the Rishonim. Halacha is not like that. The reason why it would be kosher is because if you remember before, we said that if a Megillah has extra words, missing words, it's kosher because doesn't have to be exact like a Sefer Torah. So say it's not, it's not exact. It's an igeres, it's a letter. That's a reason why to be more lenient here. The Meiri brings two opinions, and it says in the Machlokes Rishonim, if you could be Yosef l'chatchila, or if it's only b'diavad. Okay, if you read the Torah in such a way. A good question you could ask. The Ran asks this question: why is a public any different than let's say that these people will say we no longer a minyan. Each one of us want to be separate. Because then we don't want to have to hear the whole Megillah again. So let all of us, we give up the fact that we're considered to be a minyan. Could we just be separate? Could we somehow get a heter to do that? So the Ran has an explanation saying that there's a big difference between the idea of reading the Megillah b'tzibur in public or reading it not b'tzibur. It's not just how many people are there, but it changes the entire type of Megillah you're hearing. The type of Megillah you're supposed to hear in Purim is a Megillah of Pirsumei Nisa, a Megillah where the miracle is publicized. Where the Megillah is not being publicized, when you're hearing the same quality Megillah as everyone else. So hearing the Megillah, according to the Ram, without a minyan, is not on the same level as hearing the Megillah with a minyan. You're not being yotze in the same type of manner. Perhaps, according to him, you should hear the Megillah again with the minyan. Sfas Emes, right, the first guy Rebbe. He makes a difference between Bizmana, Shaloi Bizmana. If you're reading the Megillah at the proper time, then it has to be in the right type of Megillah. If it's not at the proper time, then you don't have to worry about Pirsumei Nisa, and you can even read in such a Megillah. And therefore, he says, there's a difference if you're reading the Megillah b'yachid or b'rabim, in public or in private. If I have a scroll written, a scroll of haftarahs, all the haftarahs in there, right? These are only read in shul. Nobody reads haftarah by themselves, right? You ever read haftarah by yourself? you read it only with a minyan and shul, especially from a sefer of haftarahs. If you're reading it by yourself, you're probably going to read it from a chumash or something, but not from a kosher scroll. So therefore, a sefer haftarahs is only used berabim. The only confusion you're going to have that maybe they're reading haftarah now instead of the Megillah is only going to be if you have a minyan. Without a minyan, by individuals never read from a sefer, a book of haftarahs. So therefore, if you have less than a minyan and you're reading the Megillah from a scroll, everyone will know you're not reading a haftarah now. No one's going to get confused. Oh, you're reading haftarah instead of the Megillah, because what are you doing reading from a scroll without a minyan? It must be because it's a Megillah. And today's Purim. Only when you have 10 people, and that's when a sefer of haftarahs is taken out. So then a person comes to shul and he sees you taking out a sefer of haftarahs and reading. He's not going to realize that you're reading the Megillah. He's going to think you're reading the haftarah. Only if you have a minyan. So that's what the problem with the minyan is, and that's how the Hatzvi-Bais explains it. So not from a din of presuming, this from a practical viewpoint. It's only with a minyan that you're going to use a book of haftarahs, and therefore you can't use a book of haftarahs for a Megillah when it's a minyan. But without a minyan, it's recognizable that you're doing it for a Megillah. Fine. That's 11:48. Up to the last line. Over here, we'll just do it quickly. Tomorrow, don't think, unfortunately, we'll have a shir because I'll hopefully be either in New York or on the way to New York for Kinnis HaShluchim. But Friday, Mir Hashem, Rabbi Darren will be here. He'll be here on Friday, and it will be a shir Mir Hashem on Friday.
Are you officially a shliach or?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Levi Bar Shmuel, shliach who spreads, who makes Torah. Times and Torah.
You're our shliach.
Shliach Torah is called shliach, who arranges Torah study, or who facilitates Torah study. Levi bar Shmuel. There was Levi the son of Shmuel. You have a son, Levi. Levi the son of Shmuel. Have a kakari kami de Rav Yehuda ben Megillah. Haksuva bein haksuvim. One time he was reading the Megillah on Purim, and he was reading it from a sefer nach. I guess he couldn't afford his own Megillah. Or maybe he didn't have a Megillah at home, and he had a Sefer Nach, and he was reading it from the Sefer of Haftarahs, Sefer of Tanakh. Amar Lei, Rav Yehuda told to Levi, the son of Shmuel, was it not written that if somebody reads from Megillah, which was written among the books of Nach, you have not fulfilled your obligation? Amar Reb Chia bar Abba Yechanan, says Reb Chia bar Abba in the name of Reb Yechanan, Hakari b'Megillah Aksuvim ben Aksuvim layatza. Umachilei amoicha. Some versions of the Gemara have this as part of the last Gemara, and that's how I'm reading it. Reb Yechanan says, if somebody reads a Megillah that was written among the books of Nach, but not as an Megillah, umachilei, then he has not fulfilled his obligation. But umachilei amoicha. You don't have this. We just turned the page to 19b. 1. Machilei amoicha is a term that means that he took a hammer and he banged it on the head. Right? That's what it means. He took this ruling and he banged it on the head. He cut it down. When does one not fulfill their obligation of reading the Megillah? If they read from a book of Nach, a written on parchment, when does that only apply? Meaning he sort of quantified, or minimized. He made it tzimtzum on his ruling. B'tzibur shanu. That is only if the Megillah is being read in shul for the congregation. Because you're, as we mentioned, publicizing the Megillah, you're publicizing the miracle, and here it's not recognizable that you're reading the Megillah, rather you're reading a Haftarah. However, if you don't have a minyan, then you could fulfill your obligation with reading the Megillah from a Megillah written from a book inside of a book of a Sefer of Nach. And remember why you can't consider everyone to be an individual? Remember the answer? Sfas Emes?
Oh, I forgot.
Just mentioned a minute ago, because you never take out a book of Haftarahs without a minyan.
Oh, yes.
Correct. And so that's the halacha today. as is brought down in the poskim, that you cannot fulfill your obligation with a Megillah in shul or with a minyan if it's written among the books of Nach, unless the parchments of the Megillah were taller, right, than the rest of it, or shorter than the rest of it. Otherwise, you cannot fulfill your obligation with hearing the Megillah, reading the Megillah from a Megillah written between the other books of Nach. And some opinions say that even with the Evan, 10 people, men specifically, are considered to be a tzibur. We're going to have later on this page a discussion about women. Could a woman read the Megillah for a man? It's called Megillah's Esther. If you look at the Megillah, the pasuk on the screen, it says Esther wrote down the Megillah. Esther Mordechai wrote down the Megillah. So, could a woman write a Megillah? We'll discuss all of this in Mesechta Hashem later on. But the minyan that we're talking about over here is specifically a minyan, the minyan of men, because that's when you read the Haftarah, and that's when you could get the confusion to happen.
Interesting expression.
Answer for all of these: a woman cannot write a Megillah, cannot write a Sefer Torah. It brings another Gemara where about. It says, I'm trying to remember right now. I'll remember it soon. But Esther did not actually write the Megillah herself. She told Anshe Knesset Agdolah to write the Megillah. She commanded to write the Megillah.
But if a woman actually writes a Megillah, would just be an item of calligraphy. It wouldn't be considered to be the real thing.
It's not a kosher Megillah if a woman writes a Megillah, correct. But we'll get into all of that discussion Mesechta Hashem next week. We'll maybe do 4 or 5 minutes of Kuntra Sumayan.
Is it here tomorrow?
No, not tomorrow. I'll be in town, but Friday is Mesechta Hashem. Up to Maimer Chavav, Maimer 26.
Okay.
What's the gematria of the number 26? Okay, very good.
Is it in himself?
Correct.
It's also Aleph.
Aleph?
Anyway, I'm wrong. 26.
Aleph?
Yes,
maybe?
it's if you take the Aleph itself, you have a Yud above, a Yud below, and above in the middle. Which is Pella.
From the letter Aleph, the 2 Yuds above the Aleph.
And above in the middle.
Oh, the Yud above, the Yud on the bottom, and above in the middle. That's also Shem Avaya, Yud Kevavke.
It's also Pella. Either word the same osias of Aleph is Pella.
Oh, Pella, Aleph, Lamed, Pei. Oh, Shkoyach. We just in the Gemara we just learned. The Gemara went into a long discussion about where do we need to hear the Megillah from to be Yosef to fulfill our obligation. 4 opinions based on the word Toikef, power, the strength. We're going Maimer Chavav in chapter 1. We'll talk about the idea of Toikef, strength. And what does it mean, the strength of the neshama? What does it mean, the strength, the word Toikef, the strength of the nefesh habahamis, of the animal soul? According to Chassidus, according to Tanya, there's very little gray area. Everything is black or white. Either it's kedusha or klippa, holiness or unholiness, purity or impurity, good or bad. Either we're for it or against it. There's nothing in between. There's no gray area at all, according to Tanya. Either something is there for a mitzvah, and at that point it could be elevated to kedusha, to holiness. Either it's not there for kedusha, it's not there for holiness, and if it's used for anything but holiness in this world, then it's used for impurity. It's klippa and wrong. It's the powers of unholiness, and it's not correct. And in Tanya, he describes it that if one does it at that point, if one listens to the Torah at that point, of not doing anything against the Torah, but rather just not using out the capabilities for kedusha, for holiness, it could be just as severe as serving idols, God forbid. One listens to the Yetzer Hara. one will give up their life not to, God forbid, change your religion. We see Baruch Hashem now, when there's persecutions, Jews, pogroms happening in Jews, unfortunately, all over the world, mainly in the Holy Land, it's happening in the US also, right? And many Jews are waking up and saying, I had never felt so Jewish in my life, never felt, there's Mr. Pinchas over here in the car was telling me something so interesting. And he says that there's a relative of his, and I was saying this, maybe you could correct me, that there was a general in the Israeli army who was saying how he doesn't like how he has big complaints against the Haredim, against the religious. Why are you not davening for us hard enough? Usually the complaints in Israel are a lot different if you're complaining about the religious.
Yeah.
But he says now the complaint is, why are you not praying for us hard enough? To have such a thing. But Baruch Hashem, a lot of, unfortunately took our enemies to bring it out. And may they all, have a big mapala very soon.
What's interesting is that aside from those who are against Israel, it's brought everybody together. It's
Correct. Baruch Hashem.
Unfortunately, you have some Jews who are against Israel.
However, according to Chassidus and the way it's explained in Tanya, it's not just when one comes to a test of faith, a test of identity that it happens. It happens every moment. You have a test of faith and identity. I have a situation in front of me. You're a soldier, and you have a mission from Hashem to elevate this world for godliness. This opportunity in front of me, am I going to use it to elevate it for godliness? And then we're for it. It's good. Otherwise, it's klippa. If I don't elevate it for godliness, I have an hour in front of me, and I either utilize it in a good way, in a positive way, or if I don't utilize it in a way that adds to my service of Hashem in some ways, then it's klippa, it's impurity at that time. And the fact that people rationalize different things to themselves is all as a result of the nefesh bahamis, animal soul. But that gets it from, it's called the chet eitz hadas, the sin of the tree of knowledge. And the sin of the tree of knowledge, you would think it's a good thing. You ate from a tree, and now you suddenly get to know much more things you didn't get to know. Obviously, it was a sin, something negative happened. How is it possible? The Rambam was asked this in Mer Nevuchim, God of the Perplexed. So how is it possible that through a sin, through Adam eating from the tree of knowledge, that suddenly he became smarter and wiser? And it says their eyes were open, they realized they were not clothed. And the Rambam explained that it wasn't a good thing that they suddenly had this knowledge. Beforehand, their knowledge, they were involved with lofty things. That's where their mind was. And now they ate from the tree of knowledge, they got dragged down. And now what they were paying attention to was their physical bodies. So it was something that was lacking because of this tree of knowledge. Yeah,
the Rabbi said the difference before was actually the Yetzer Hara was outside.
Right.
And they put the Yetzer Hara inside, and now it's
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. However, every single thing could be used in a positive way as well. And if somebody's a meshugana,
A
crazy person, it could also be used for holiness as well. And from the Garden of Eden, from a stream came out, and it says Hishka. It watered the Nachal Hashittim, the valley of Shittim. Besides for being a actual geographical place, but Shittim comes from the word shtus, foolishness. And we have a potential in ourselves to use every capability we have, even the capability of being a meshugana, in a good way, as we're going to have, as Kuntur Sumayan, as many Mamarim Abasi Lagani discuss this, and as we're going to have it over here in Kuntur Sumayan as well. So knowledge, being a bar seichel, being smart, isn't always the greatest thing. And to conclude with a very short anecdote. There in the town of Lubavitch, there was a yeshiva which was established by the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was very, methodical, orderly, and he actually categorized in private lists himself, not public lists. Until today, they're not public. He categorized all the students of the yeshiva in different levels. Aleph Sheba Aleph, Aleph Beis Gimel Daled, A, B, C, D, and Aleph was the top of the crop, like an A, and D we could say was the bottom of the crop of the boys which were accepted to the yeshiva. To be accepted, he had to be someone worthy of being accepted. And in those itself, he subdivided them into 4 categories. Aleph Sheba Aleph, Beis Sheba Aleph, meaning A, B, A, B, A, C, A, D, and all 4 of them. So you had 16, let's say, subcategories of the yeshiva, and the boys were subdivided. In the private, the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, is in charge of the yeshiva, and on his own, saying how he subdivides the Bakr and the boys in the yeshiva.
It has to do with the Friedrich Rebbe who actually did this division.
Correct. And this is correct. The yeshiva was established 1897, and it was in the town of Lubavitch. Friedrich Rebbe ran it personally until 1920, but it was in the town of Lubavitch until 1916. 15, right. 15 they left, and 16 the yeshiva left, right? Till World War I, rolled around over there to that area. He says that about give 2 decades later, decade or 2 later, and you have all the communist persecutions, and the stories are well known, tens of hundreds of thousands of stories that we hear different Chassidim who had self-sacrifice to keep Yiddishkeit alive in Russia, everything it took. All the Chassidim, Friedrich Rebbe says that from the Daled Sheba Daled, meaning the 4 of the 4, DD, the lowest category, all of them, every single one of them, went on Mesiras Nefesh, had made no compromises at all, and were the biggest activists when it came to holding up yeshivas, chadarim, during those Soviet times. The other ones, unfortunately, there are many boys of that yeshiva who also, went after the communist ways or other things that happened, or other things that rationalized, or or what happened to many Jews, during that time period. Unfortunately, where Yiddishkeit was lost from them.
Yeah.
But the Daled Sheba Daled, the ones who could say are the least, the ones who aren't you could say the sharpest tool in the shed, so to speak, meaning the ones who are on the lowest rung, not the greatest, scholars of the yeshiva and all that. Every single one of them had Mesiras Nefesh. So not necessarily always having seichel, wisdom, is always the best thing. We'll have that there.